All right, let's get right into it. We're in the middle of a huge conservation crisis, one where all the old rules just don't seem to apply anymore. So today, we're going to talk about a really radical, super controversial, and maybe, just maybe, a world-saving idea called assisted colonization. And this is the gut punch question at the heart of it all. It's the ethical tightrope that conservationists are walking right now. You're looking at a massive gamble with the highest possible stakes, and it really forces us to rethink everything we thought we knew about what it means to protect nature. So, to even understand why we're considering such a wild strategy, you have to get your head around the scale of the problem. Our planet is changing, and it's happening so fast that it's basically shattering the foundations of conservation as we've known it for a century. You know, for the longest time, the playbook was simple. Find an amazing place with lots of wildlife, draw a line on a map around it, and call it a national park or a reserve, protect everything inside. This whole fortress conservation idea was great, but it was built on one huge assumption, that the world was more or less stable. Well, that assumption is now completely out the window. And this is where you can really see the mismatch we're talking about. On the left, you had the then. Stable climates, so we built fixed parks. Simple. But on the right, you have the now. With rapid climate change, species are on the run. They're heading towards the poles, climbing up mountains, desperately trying to find the climate they evolved to live in. The problem? The parks we built to protect them are stuck in place. They're becoming like museums for species that have already left. And this quote just nails the most desperate situations. For some animals and plants, there's just no escape route. Imagine you're a creature that lives on a mountain. As it gets warmer, you move up, and up, and up, until you hit the peak. And then, what? There's nowhere else to go. You're trapped. It's this exact escalator to extinction that's forcing us to think about a truly radical plan. So, faced with that reality, scientists are debating a plan that was, frankly, unthinkable not that long ago. It's a plan that means we have to become active gardeners of the planet, not just passive guardians watching from the sidelines. And this is it, assisted colonization. You might also hear it called managed relocation or assisted migration. The idea is actually pretty simple, but it's profound. If a species can't get to a new, safer home on its own because of highways or cities or just because the climate is changing too fast, then we step in. We physically move it ourselves. We're basically trying to give evolution a helping hand to catch up with a crisis that, let's be honest, we created. Now, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. As you can see here, there are two main reasons you do this. The push strategy on the left is what you probably think of first. It's a rescue mission. A species is getting pushed out of its home because it's dying, so we move it to save it. But the pull strategy is different. That's where a whole ecosystem is in trouble, and it needs a certain type of player, like a key pollinator or a plant that provides shelter, so we pull in a new, more resilient species to fill that job. Okay, but as you can imagine, this is hugely controversial. A lot of critics see this as us playing God with nature, a massive roll of the ecological dice, where if we get it wrong, the consequences could be catastrophic. So let's look at why they're so incredibly worried. This, right here, is the big one, the absolute number one fear. I mean, conservation history is just littered with horror stories of species introductions that have gone terribly, terribly wrong. We meant well, but we ended up creating an ecological nightmare. The fear is that we could do it all over again, this time with the best intentions and still mess everything up. And the ways it can go wrong are just terrifying. What if the new species we introduce just completely outcompetes the locals for food and space? What if it brings with it some new disease that the native wildlife has no defense against? Or what if it starts interbreeding with a close relative and just wipes out its unique genetic identity? The nightmare scenario is that the plan to save one species ends up wiping out several others. And on top of all those ecological what-ifs, there are the practical problems. I mean, this stuff is hard. A huge review of past projects where people moved birds and mammals around found that 58% of them failed. That's more than half. These projects are insanely expensive, they're incredibly difficult, and as this number shows, we're historically more likely to fail than succeed. So with all those risks, you have to be asking, why on earth is this still on the table? Well, because as scary as the risks of doing something are, the people who support this argue that the consequences of doing nothing are far, far worse. And this quote gets right to the heart of their argument. They say that in a world that we've already messed with so much, pretending we can just be hands-off is a fantasy. Choosing not to step in isn't a neutral choice. It is a choice. It's a choice to stand by and just let a species go extinct. So this slide really frames that brutal trade-off. On one side, you've got the risk of action. Yeah, you might cause a problem. But on the other side, for these trapped species, you've got the certainty of inaction. They will go extinct if you do nothing. It is a terrible, terrible choice between a potential disaster and a guaranteed one. So how do you possibly make a decision like that? You obviously can't just flip a coin. To try and navigate this mess, scientists have been working on creating structured frameworks, basically rule books to guide these impossibly hard choices. One of the first models was this pretty logical step-by-step process. First, you ask, is the species really, truly on the brink of extinction? If the answer is yes, you go to step 2. Can we even pull this off? Is it affordable? Do we have the technology? If that's a yes, then you get to the final, biggest step. Do the potential benefits of saving this species outweigh all those massive risks we just talked about? But reality is rarely a simple checklist. So a more nuanced framework came along that looks at 4 different things all at once. It measures the risk to the species we want to save and the risk to the ecosystem we want to move it to, but it also adds 2 other critical pieces. Feasibility, again, can we actually do this? And this last one is huge, acceptability. Will the public, will local communities actually support this? It turns a simple yes-no question into a much bigger and, honestly, a much more transparent conversation. So, after weighing all these arguments, the pros, the cons, the risks, the rewards, where does that leave us? What's the bottom line on this whole radical rescue plan? And this is the most important thing to remember. Nobody is suggesting we start moving species around willy-nilly. This is emergency room conservation. This is the definition of a last resort, something you only even consider when the alternative is watching a species vanish from the earth forever. Ultimately, this entire debate forces us to ask ourselves a really deep, maybe uncomfortable, philosophical question. We have already changed this planet so much. The lines between what's natural and what's human-influenced are getting blurrier every single day. So in this new world we've made, maybe our biggest responsibility isn't trying to preserve a past that doesn't exist anymore, but to very consciously and very carefully start shaping a future that can.